there's something a little unusual to see. Clouds streaming from the north, going right to left on that frame, and we're looking west, so those clouds are moving south. So we've had a little bit of a cold front move through this part of Texas, but overall very quiet, and it's that way for much of the country. Let me pull up the AWIPS radar here. This is kind of a neat mosaic, and let me switch over to that real quick, and there we go. Don't see that too often, just everything pretty much quiet across the country. We do have that Pacific system trying to make its way into the Portland area right there, and then looking out to the east. A little bit of shower activity there in the North Carolina area. And you can see this stuff here around the Knoxville area looks a little bit more showery. So you can see it's got a little bit more of a convective look. Temperatures across the U.S. very, I would say a little bit of a cool down here over the past couple days. You can see that cold air sweeping into the Midwest and into the southern plains, and just to the south, that stagnant tropical air lurking just to the south there. High temperatures across the country, again pretty mild except up north where Fred is, up there where it's 10. Elsewhere around the country, we were seeing about 50 in this area, and down in Arizona, lots of 70s, and on into Southern California there. So I tell you, we're really locked into this pattern. We've seen what you are looking at on this 500 millibar chart. This has been in place for probably a good 2 or 3 weeks, and it's because of a blocking pattern. And we've talked about this over the past several days, seeing a Rex block here. And that's where we have an omega block. Let me see if I can move that up a little bit. Let me outline the omega block here. You can see this high over Alaska forming this omega shape, a lot like the Greek letter for omega. But south of that, there's this cutoff low. So it's kind of 2 blocking patterns for the price of one here. And as a result, we're stuck downstream from that and have this northwesterly flow working on the U.S. here. Overall, this upper air map looks almost identical to yesterday. And on the satellite map, about 15 minutes ago when I pulled this up, I actually had to go back and double check to make sure I didn't actually pull up yesterday's chart, because this looks about the same as what we had yesterday. This is the infrared satellite imagery, just showing some mid-clouds over the central plains here. That low cloud, you'll notice that we had, doesn't really show up so much. That's because the cloud temperatures are very close to the ground temperatures. These are stratus and stratocumulus clouds. The tops are around the 5 to 10 Celsius range above zero, so they blend right in with the ground. And just to give you a better look at that, let me pull up the Fort Worth sounding. This was taken about 1 hour ago there at Fort Worth. And we show a pretty good layer of cold air aloft right in this area. You see where the temperature line, let me show you the temperature line. That's this right here. The temperature line goes very far to the left, right in that area. So we've got a cold layer at about 3,000 feet off the ground, but it's undergoing a whole lot of modification. And you see down below it, there's a lot of warmth. In fact, the lapse rate there is dry adiabatic, since it follows these lines here. So this is a good example of very cold air moving south through the Great Plains and modifying rapidly. So that also is very conducive when you have just a little bit of moisture. That's conducive to producing stratocumulus layers like what you saw there. And there we go. There's that layer of high relative humidity right there. And above that, if we just deleted all this down here, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between that in a sounding along the Gulf Coast, because this is all tropical air, slightly dry tropical air because of this moisture line right here very far over to the left. And above that, a rather high tropopause. So this kind of shows you the air mass as a whole is rather tropical. Tropopause up there near 39,000 feet. And you can also see that reflected on the winds, looking at mostly at westerly and west-northwesterly winds, except right near the ground we pick up some light northerly winds, and not very much of a push, just 10 knots there at Oklahoma City. So, or what did I throw in Oklahoma City? I mean, Fort Worth there at about 3,000 feet. So, as you might guess, we're going to not see very much of more of this cold air coming southward. What's going to follow next is the high pressure area. And then after that, we'll get the warm air advection. We'll take a look at, let's go northeastward. Let's take a look at Little Rock. And as you might guess, they're going to be deeper in the cold air. And you see the sounding looks a lot like Fort Worth there, very cold, with a modifying sounding right here, dry adiabatic. Okay, so let's go further northeast. Let's go to Nashville. Just looking at this, it's kind of lame that we don't have a sounding around Paducah. Another hole there that NOAA really should fill there. And here we can see modifying polar air again, but kind of a deeper layer of moisture here in the mid-levels. But other than that, looks tropical. Then we can take one more look and go up a little bit further north to Lincoln. That's going to get us very further into the cold air, and we can see the column as a whole shift to the left. So here we're getting more into the polar air itself, and a little layer of altostratus here at about 18,000 feet. Very strong winds in that sounding right there. Okay, we'll take a quick look at the surface chart. And before I do that, I'm going to just take a look at chat. Don't want to ignore that. Sue checking in, and there's Fred and Mark and Andrew. See, we got Kevin here. Tom J. I don't know if I've seen Tom J on here recently. The Eskinny or the Skinny. You have to let me know how to pronounce that. Brian Harp, Lexi. They're in Texas. Got Mark Davis. Do we have two Marks on? Looks like we do. Sue M. And let's see, Tom J. Fred Reamer likes the diabetic, needs some diabetic heating. And Mark likes the music selections. Yeah, we'll have to put up some more up-tempo stuff. Michael Burrell checking in, Scott Haley, and Tree Nelson. And Tom J. is the one in Las Cruces, New Mexico. Yeah, I remember you were getting that roofing work done. I wonder how that's come along there. So there we go. There's our surface chart showing the northeast winds, a little bit of that isentropic lift. Actually, this is more modification of the air mass. Very strong lapse rates in the lower part of the atmosphere and condensing some moisture at the very top of that cold layer. So that's more or less what that is right there. But in the central plains, upslope flow developing there near Denver. So the western periphery of that front is right here. So I'm giving you a little bit of an analysis lesson here. So there's the tail end of that shallow cold front. Right here is an area where we have upslope. And during the warm season towards May and June, this is a ripe area for thunderstorm development because moisture tends to pool in this area right here, and that and a little bit of isentropic lift on the back side of that front will help give us upward motion in the lower part of that sounding. Further up north, there's the location of the front, and you can see a distinct difference going from south to north. Here over southwest Montana, very mild weather. Windy conditions there from the southwest. Then up north of that, much colder and winds out of the north. So that's your location of the front right there. And one thing that might help you when you're doing analysis like this is to not take in too much at once. If it gets kind of difficult, just focus on one area. Let me shift that up a little bit. So if you just focus on Wyoming, for example, this is where you can see that north wind right here, contrasting sharply with the south wind down here. So just take on the data at different scales and see what you can pick out there. Okay, let's head to the frontal analysis and do that real quick. So you've probably seen this chart here for the past 2 or 3 months. This is a NAM forecast. It's a 6-hour forecast. You can see that down there at the bottom. And I'm using the model here to get an idea of what the thickness values are over the U.S. Now I can plot this out in digital atmosphere, but I kind of like the very fine-grained features of the NAM. It really helps you offshore where you don't have soundings to go with. Now another way you can get thickness is to just look at the heights on an up-air chart and then do subtraction from the 1000 millibar height through the 500 millibar height. But it's better to kind of use pre-prepared charts for this. So let's see, what do we have? We've got high pressure covering much of the northern plains like that. Bit of a ridge extending into the Midwest and into the southern plains here. So we'll put this all under high pressure here. And then around the periphery of that, we've got a Pacific low off the coast that has been there for the past week, just spinning out there. And then around the periphery, we've got the tail end of our front, so we see a little bit of a trough here. Maybe even a little bit of troughing into the Gulf Coast somewhere. And then we pick up this heat low in Mexico. So you've got heating on the mountains, the mountainous regions out there, the deserts, and so you're going to get low pressure at the surface. So as a result, we've got this low right here. And temperatures in that region are certainly pretty warm, and you see that 95-degree reading right here. So those of you up in the northern U.S., it's probably hard to picture that that's going on only a few hours away by airplane, but sure enough. So let's do the frontal analysis real quick and find my chart here. Okay, there we go. Here's the old frontal boundary, links up with maybe a little bit of a low in the Carolinas where we saw that precipitation, and then maybe carrying down into the Gulf Coast area, then up through Colorado, and then through Idaho like that. And then that'll connect with the Pacific system way out here. So there you go, that's the analysis. And you can see that the bulk of the cold air well to the northeast over Quebec and Ontario. And that's going to be heading to the east, out of the picture, and we're going to see the warm air advection start redeveloping out to the west. So what's happening with that big storm system we were looking at for next week? Let's check out the GFS forecast. This is 500 millibars. And you remember we've been looking up here at this troughing in Yukon and British Columbia. The earlier models had taken this trough and carved out a little bit of a low and sent that westward. So let's see. We've got that trough right there over British Columbia. Then let's see what happens. Here's the big question. Moves eastward, and yeah, looks like we've got a very large trough. This looks more prominent than what the GF had yesterday. So it looks like we're kind of on track with stormy weather here for next week, midweek, for the Great Lakes area. So that'll really give us something to cover here as we get into that pattern. Then we get the second trough come in behind. This is going to be kind of associated with a little bit Alberta Clipper. Then we get a couple weak troughs come across the Canadian plains, and then we start getting into a bit of a ridging pattern here. So it looks like a quiet week after that, just kind of northwesterly flow, and then getting into the 15th and 16th, just quiet. And then for Chaser Con, Big Ridge looks to be pretty quiet, so still looking on track with that. All right, so I think we're ready to head into the forecast and wrap things up. Let me get the charts fixed up here. Okay, let me check the chat here and just keep in touch with what's going on. NAM, not altogether model. It's pretty good. I've never heard that one. Ancient Astronaut has joined up with us. ATL, I think that's Atlanta. Yeah, Atlanta Capricorn. Already. And already. So let's head into the forecast, starting out with tomorrow's picture here. There's our front down in the Gulf Coast region. And let's run it forward through the weekend. High pressure sinking on down, and you can see the warm air advection starting to build in through the Pecos Valley up to the high plains. So there you go. So we're going to start seeing that warm up here on the plains as that starts coming together. And you remember yesterday we talked about that low-level jet that we see during the spring. This is the return flow starting to set up in the lower Rio Grande. So you see that tight pressure gradient start redeveloping. That's where we would see the stronger southerly winds starting to develop. So that's a feature we're going to look for as we get into spring. So pretty quiet over the weekend. Warm air advection spreading into the Midwest. And here comes an Alberta Clipper coming out of the Dakotas here. And we start getting stormy in the Midwest. That's that new system coming into the Midwest area. And we see the tight pressure gradient coming together here. A little bit of a lee side trough developing there in Colorado. And now we see pressure falls really come together. This is Tuesday. System moving out into the Great Plains here. So there you go. There's your fronts. Large warm front across the Midwest here. So a little bit of shower activity with that. So we're at Tuesday the 7th here. We'll move it forward. Wow, now we start getting some really prominent precipitation here in the Midwest. Cold front coming south. And looks like the snow line stays up in the Minneapolis, Green Bay, and Traverse City area. So we've seen the GFS kind of go back to the idea of a very deep system in the Great Lakes, but the main difference is stronger cold push to the southeast and to the east, not to the south like we had a couple days ago. So that's the main change there. And then lake effect snows. I guess we're getting towards the end of the season for lake effect, but there it is at the 144-hour point. And a little bit of a new system here in the Colorado area. Here it is moving south towards Texas. A very strong cold air advection into the Central Plains. Very dry system. Just a little bit of elevated snow shower activity over Missouri right there. This is the 9th on Thursday. And so we see that take off, cold air advection in Texas, and that heads into the Carolinas there on the 10th. So that's in a good position to kind of run up the East Coast there. Possible nor'easter situation. This one, for now, it looks like the GFS kind of carries that out into the Atlantic. but we'll have to keep an eye on that. And then, as I mentioned, kind of a quiet week, 12th, 13th, 14th, just a weak northwesterly flow, a few outbreaks of mild cold air streaming down, kind of a weak cold air advection pattern. And then we get into ChaserCon weekend here. Lee side trough, warm air advection, and high pressure aloft. So it's going to be kind of a warm pattern then. And that's about it. The model ends here on the 18th with a new system coming together there in Alberta. So that'll start coming into the picture later in the month here. Okay, that's about all I got here. I appreciate you all watching, and looking at this message from Ancient Astronaut. Very cool. All right. I think that's about all I can think of. Anyway, I appreciate you all watching, and we'll see you tomorrow.